From CNN Center in Atlanta, coverage of Election 2000 continues. Here again, Judy Woodruff, Bernard Shaw, Jeff Greenfield, and Bill Schneider.
12 o'clock on the east coast of the United States, and we are able to make a call in the last state to close its polls tonight. Alaska, the land of the midnight sun, goes to George W. Bush. It's 3 electoral votes. No real surprise at all here. This state has only voted for a Democratic candidate once since it became a state in the year 1959. So here's the total. George W. Bush, 240 electoral votes. His are the red states on that map. They are from east almost all the way to the west. Al Gore, 231 electoral votes. The states in blue, counting California, and going all the way over to the state of Maine. It is a close
Look at this. Just
election.
6 states left. One of those will put somebody over the top. We don't know who it's going to be. It's amazing.
This is the raw vote total at this hour, with 2/3 of the precincts across the United States reporting. Look at that, 49% going for George W. Bush, 35.1 million to 34.57 million. What is that, about 500,000
About half
votes?
a million votes.
70 million votes cast, and half a million votes separate them.
That's right.
Let's see now, when was the last time?
Hubert Humphrey and Richard Nixon. Nixon took a 500,000 vote win. Before that, you got to go to Kennedy-Nixon. But this is the closest race in 32 years, and who knows, it could get closer.
These are the states that are going to decide it. Let's take a look. There are 6 of them that we are not able to call. Arkansas, 6 electoral votes. Florida, the big Megillah at this point, 25. Iowa, 7. Oregon, 7. Washington and Wisconsin each carrying 11 electoral votes. There are 67 electoral votes up for grabs.
And Judy, 4 of those states were carried by Michael Dukakis in 1988, one of the weaker Democratic presidential candidates in modern times. And Al Gore has not yet been able to put away 4 of the Dukakis states. We've been looking at that all fall long. It looks like it may be pivotal.
A lot's changed.
I know why.
Why are the many reasons? That's precisely the question of the hour. Why
Here's why.
able to do it?
A man named Ralph Nader. Ralph Nader is doing very well in Oregon. Well, not very well, but he's doing enough votes. Those states are so close between Gore and Bush that the Nader vote, which isn't particularly high, has the balance of power between the 2.
I wonder if are we able to look at the raw vote totals in some of these states showing the Nader factor? I'm asking our folks who have control over the graphics that we're looking at. Are we able to see, for example, in Washington, in Wisconsin, what kind of Nader numbers are there?
In time, Judy, in time.
But it does indicate, remember,
in good time, I'm told, that will happen.
Remember, we did point to the Nader factor as one of the 7 keys to the presidency, and it looks like we were coming down to the fact that question, the answer to the question of how big the Nader factor was in some of these states, may determine who the next president of the United States is. He doesn't look like he's going to get his $7 million, but he may affect the outcome of this entire election.
Let's discuss for a moment why there is a Nader factor.
That's right. And we think we have some evidence to this point from the state of Oregon, where Nader's getting 4%. But we asked the Nader voters, how would they have voted in a choice between Gore and Bush? 61% of the Oregon Nader voters said they would have voted for Al Gore, only 10% for George Bush, and 1/4 of them say they wouldn't have voted for at all. That is why the Gore people worried about Ralph Nader. By 6 to 1, his votes would have come from Al Gore, not George Bush. Right now, Oregon, the votes between Gore and Bush are nose to nose. They're very, very close. The Nader voters would have made the difference for Al Gore, and he would have carried Oregon most likely if Ralph Nader hadn't been on the ballot.
And his argument during his campaign was that there's no difference per se between the Democrats and Republicans. They're dominated by lobbyists and big corporations, and they're not to be trusted.
That's right. If you vote for a third-party candidate like Ralph Nader, you honestly have to believe that it doesn't make any difference which candidate wins, Gore or Bush, that they're no different on the issues that are important to you. And the Gore people trotted out a whole lot of reputable liberals like Robert Redford and Al Franken and Gloria Steinem to say, yes, it makes a tremendous difference, abortion issues, Supreme Court, but apparently there are enough Nader voters remaining who simply agreed with Ralph Nader. It really doesn't make a difference.
And that vote swapping that we talked about a little bit earlier going on the internet across the country, websites where you could go into the website and arrange, presumably, to trade your vote.
Yes.
If you were in a state where voting for Ralph Nader could hurt Al Gore and you didn't want to do that, We are now able to say the state of Arkansas is in George W. Bush's corner. The home state of President Bill Clinton and its 6 electoral votes fall to George W. Bush, giving the Texas governor an electoral vote total of 246, putting him only 24 votes away from becoming
Florida,
the next president of the
and
United
guess
States.
how many
Florida has
Guess how many
25. And Florida, with the state of Florida, if it went to George Bush, he'd be the winner.
Or some combination
Or
of
some
these
of the
other
others.
states that we're looking at.
So-
Washington, Wisconsin.
Oregon and Iowa.
And let's look at that list again. We were just able to take Arkansas off. We are left with Washington and Wisconsin, 11 each, Oregon 7, Iowa 7, Florida 25.
Don't tell me this isn't exciting.
Notice, though, that one of the ways George Bush is inching closer to what he needs is by winning the home states of Bill Clinton and Al Gore.
Well, let's talk about which states on this list or rather George W. Bush is most likely to pick up. We know he's still very much in the running. He's in the running in all of these states. Washington is a state that Al Gore was given a better shot at going in. And I
That's
think
right.
the raw vote numbers we showed a little while ago showed that holding up.
Yeah, Washington has voted Democratic actually the last 3 elections, like Oregon, including Michael Dukakis, but of course we mentioned the Nader factor. You know, Sam Rayburn used to talk about the 49 states in the Soviet of Washington because it was considered a very left-wing state. It had a lot of union voters, and if the unions are needed anywhere for Al Gore, they were needed, the polls are closed in the state of Washington.
If you are just joining CNN's live coverage of Election 2000 in the United States, wherever you're watching from in the world, if you're trying to figure out what is this, these 5 states with the total 61 at the bottom, those are the only number of electoral votes still outstanding, still at stake. It is very tight between Governor Bush of Texas. He has 246 electoral votes. Vice President Gore has 231. So this is the 61.
Close.
And if Jeb Bush had delivered the state of Florida to his brother, he would be president now.
Well, he may yet do that.
Still
He hasn't-
outstanding.
He may.
Still much to talk about tonight. Let's go to our 2 reporters who've been spending the most time with the Gore and Bush campaigns over the last year or so. John King in Nashville, Tennessee, Candy Crowley in Austin, Texas. John, as you and the people around Vice President Gore listen to this talk about these states where Ralph Nader's a factor, what are they saying?
Well, certainly they believe Ralph Nader has been a factor, Judy. They do believe they will win Washington and Oregon, but as the vice president watches the results in his hotel room right now, we're told he keeps getting updates from campaign chairman Bill Daley. This mathematical fact, unless he wins the state of Florida, if our projections hold up, he cannot win the White House. As we just gave Arkansas to Governor Bush, Al Gore can now not get to 270 unless he wins the state of Florida. Now, we're told, he's being told by Chairman Daley and others that they believe Florida can turn around. Governor Bush still leads right now. They're saying the remaining precincts out are in largely Democratic precincts, but that could be wishful thinking there on the Gore campaign's part, but they must now pull out Florida. Let me give you a quick example of the roller coaster emotions here. Joe Andrew is the national chairman of the Democratic Party. He came out here a short time ago and said he was confident of a Gore victory, confident they would win Florida. Ed Rendell, though, the former Philadelphia mayor and the general chairman of the Democratic Party, already pointing fingers at the Gore campaign. He says they should not have pulled their advertising money out of Ohio. And he says they should have made greater use of President Clinton on the campaign trail, especially in Arkansas, the state we just gave to Governor Bush. Ed Rendell saying they only let the president go there 1 day. They should have sent him down there for 3 days or perhaps an entire week. Back to you.
You do get the sense the recriminations are already beginning, even though we don't know the outcome yet. This is going to be a very painful night for the person who loses. We are calling the state of Washington for Al Gore, and it's 11 electoral votes. We just heard John King say the Gore campaign expected to win the state of Washington, and we are at CNN now able to give those electoral votes to the vice president based on our examination of exit polling and the key precincts. Now here's the total. George W. Bush, 246. Al Gore, 242. You just heard John King say the Gore people now believe that there is no mathematically, statistically possible way that Al Gore can get to 270 without the state of Florida, unless one of the states that have already been called for George W. Bush is taken back.
If Al Gore were to win Oregon, Wisconsin, and Iowa, and Florida went to Bush, Bush would win the White House 271 to 267. You think it can be closer than that?
Why don't we go to Hal Bruno and find out? Take us into the voting.
In Florida.
In Florida.
In Florida, especially in Florida. Well, we can go to Hal.
Just to talk
We're
about
coming
it.
to you now, Hal.
Okay.
Take us into the voting and tell us what is going on in this Sunshine State.
Well, what's going on in the Sunshine State is the closest election anybody has ever seen. The 2/3 of the vote that's outstanding is right here on the Gold Coast, and that is the Democratic stronghold. 2/3 of the outstanding vote in Florida is in the Democratic stronghold. Over here in Tampa Bay, which is the swing factor, they're running dead even with each other, Bush and Gore.
But Hal Bruno, we did hear Karl Rove say within the last hour or so that the results that he was getting back from that part of the state, particularly the Gold Coast, gave him reason to believe that they were going to take Florida.
Well, he may feel that way, and who's to say he's wrong, because nobody knows at this point. But that was an hour ago, Judy, and the way the count is going there, it's so close that it literally is changing every few minutes.
So, Hal, you're saying that 2/3 of the outstanding vote in the Democrat stronghold stretches from South Miami, Miami-Dade County.
From North Miami up to Fort Lauderdale, up to West Palm Beach. And Broward County is about 15% of what's outstanding, just Broward County alone, and that is the stronghold within the stronghold.
And Hal, you're saying simply that those votes have not been counted yet.
That's right. And what it comes down to this is Florida could go either way at this point. We don't know who's going to win Florida.
Right now, our vote total, with 86% of the precincts reporting, George W. Bush has 50%, a little over 2.4 million votes, to Al Gore's 48%, a little over 2.3 million votes.
It's a 100,000 vote lead for those of us who like our numbers uncooked and raw. And I think Hal Bruno could, he said it perfectly. We don't know how this number turns out because you know where those votes are that have yet to be counted.
And Hal, what about Florida? Wisconsin still has 11 electoral votes, and we're not able to call that yet.
Yeah, Wisconsin also has gotten much closer. And Nader seems to be dropping off a bit in Wisconsin. Al Gore is doing better now in Madison, and Nader, let me show you on my little machine here. In this area, Madison, which is where the Democrats have to build up their strength, Ralph Nader at one point was pulling about 6-7% of the vote. Now he's only pulling about 3 or 4%. And so that's helping Gore. He's doing much better there. But here's the surprise. Up here in the Northwest, which normally is Democratic territory, up there, George Bush is doing better than anyone ever expected he would do. And the result of that is Wisconsin right now is just simply dead even, too close to call.
When you say Nader is falling off, Hal, what do you mean by that?
Well, at one point, Judy, he had been running about 6% in Wisconsin. And the last we saw, just a few minutes ago, he was down under 4%, closer to 3%. And that has to help Al Gore.
Hal, you are a political walking factotum, formerly ABC News political director, former Newsweek national correspondent covering politics. We're both from Chicago, both from Illinois. Your thoughts, what's going through your mind right now?
Well, Bernie, you mentioned Chicago, where we're both from, where we learned to be reporters. And you got to go back to 1960, when the vote was very slow coming in from the west side of Chicago. And it made the difference, and Kennedy won it. No such thing is occurring today. Same thing, though, happened in 1968, where the vote was slow coming not only from Chicago, but also from parts of Missouri. And again, there's nothing like that happening today in those places. I think the vote coming in slow today is simply because it's such a complicated thing. I don't think there's anything going on.
Well, we should also mention, Hal, that as we were in Florida, and we should give credit where credit is due. Mary Madeline, hours ago, when the networks had called this for Gore, pointed out that there was a huge absentee ballot vote total coming out of Florida. It now looks like we may have to go to the absentee ballots to find out who is going to win Florida and quite possibly who's going to win the White House.
Yeah, Jeff, you're right, because the question Bernie asked, going back to those previous elections, absentee voting wasn't the thing that it is today. Today, absentee voting is very important, especially in a state like Florida. And the bad news for the Gore people is when it comes to absentee voting, Republicans generally do better. That's been the pattern.
And how long does it take to count those kinds of ballots? We want to know when we're going to know. Okay.
Well, we know in Washington it could take a few days.
Right.
I think in Florida it probably will come a lot faster than that.
Well,
we want to go to...
we're going to Larry King in
Washington,
Washington, who has someone from the Gore campaign, a very particular someone. Larry.
Thank you, Bernie. Our panel will resume in a little while. Ann Richards, Howard Baker, and Bob Woodward. But right now, we'll go to Nashville. Mark Fabiani, a very familiar face now on the American scene, the Gore Deputy Campaign Manager for Communications. We have 4 states left. Florida appears to be the key. What do you hear,
It
Mark?
is. You said it all, Larry. Florida is the key. It looks like the candidate who wins Florida will be the next president of the United States. It's going right down to the wire. It's white knuckle time here. You know, all the networks called Florida for Al Gore earlier in the evening, and we think it's going to end up with Al Gore. As you guys just mentioned on your broadcast, 2/3 of the outstanding votes in Florida are from the Democratic strongholds in that state. When those votes start rolling in, Al Gore is going to go ahead. And the prediction that CNN and everyone else made earlier in the evening, Florida for Al Gore, is going to come true, and Al Gore will be the next president.
How about the large amount of absentee ballots, which was also discussed and which they also say usually go Republican?
I think that's an oversimplification this year. In Florida, a lot of senior citizens vote absentee, and senior citizens in Florida are especially concerned with Governor Bush's plan to privatize Social Security. So we'll hold our own with the absentee ballots this year in Florida, and with the Democratic strongholds yet to be counted in the state, we're very hopeful that by the end of the night, Florida will be where it started the evening with all of your projections, right with Al Gore.
Are you angry at anyone over those early projections? How do you feel? How does the candidate feel?
Well, it's hard to be angry with people. You wonder what happened. You had every single network, people who have been projecting elections for years and years and years and doing a very good job of it, all unanimously predict Florida for Gore. And I think you guys did so for good reason. The exit polls all showed Gore well ahead by 3 or 4 points. And the fact is that Bush is slightly ahead there now, but only because the Democratic strongholds in the state, Dade County and Broward County, still haven't had their votes counted. And when those votes are counted, Gore will go back ahead, and the networks will be proven to be right belatedly, but right nonetheless, and Al Gore will win Florida.
You will still need, though, one of the other 3, will you not? Iowa, Oregon, or Wisconsin?
I believe that's correct.
One of the other 3. Wisconsin, they're reporting dead even. Oregon, a little too early. And Iowa, dead even. So even though if you win Florida, you still got to win one of the other 3.
That's correct. But we feel good about our chances in the other 3. Those 3 states, as you've pointed out before, are traditionally Democratic states, and one of them will certainly break in our direction, if not more than one. It all comes down to Florida, and we're waiting anxiously for the results, and we remain very hopeful.
As our anchors have pointed out, why do you think your candidate has not done as well in, say, Iowa and Wisconsin, 2 states traditionally Democratic?
Well,
Why is that so close?
I think, as you pointed out, Ralph Nader has hurt in Wisconsin. He's taken some of the vote that would normally go to the vice president. And I'm not sure about Iowa. I'd have to look at those numbers, and I'm sure smarter people than I am will take a look at those numbers and figure that out. But the bottom line is those states, one of those 3 states that you mentioned will break in our direction. And when we win Florida, that'll make Al Gore the next president.
Is there any chance you see this going into tomorrow or Thursday?
That's a very good question, Larry. It certainly could go into tomorrow, especially if there are a lot of absentee ballots in Florida. And I don't think you're going to be able to tell who's going to win this election until you can tell who wins Florida. So it's all in the hands of whoever it is in Florida that's counting all these votes.
Thanks very much, Mark. We'll stay close. Let's
Thank
go
you,
now
Larry.
to Austin, Texas.
Good to see you.
Good seeing you. Representative of the Bush campaign, Ed Gillespie. What's the mood there? Have you heard what Mark had to say, Ed, that it's all up to Florida? Do you agree with that?
I heard part of it. Not entirely, Larry. We feel good about Florida, by the way. We're outperforming our vote goals in Duval County by about 44,000 votes, and Clay County just south of there by about 7,000 votes. So we are optimistic about Florida this evening. But there's still some things, as you know, earlier in the evening, Florida was being called for Vice President Gore. That's looking like that's going to actually end up being called for Governor Bush. We're optimistic. But for example, in New Mexico right now, they're 98% of the votes are in. And we are down by 1,000 votes. But there are about 96,000 absentee and early ballots that have yet to be counted and opened. But they're identified by party, and 44,000 of them are Republican absentee and early ballots, and 40,000 of them are Democrat. That's a 4,000 advantage. We're down 1,000.
Oh, boy.
And so if the independents break the way they have during the course of the day, we will end up carrying New Mexico. It's blue on the map on the networks right now, but it's not likely to stay that way.
Are you saying, Ed, that you might lose Florida, chance, and
sir.
still win? Well, if
No,
you say you win Florida, it's why even bring up New Mexico? If you win Florida, you win.
Well, because I think it's important. I mean, every electoral college vote counts, and the people in New Mexico ought to know that that they're very much likely to end up in the
But then you are saying you've won this election because you're going to win Florida. So, I mean, New Mexico is interesting, but only interesting. You've won Florida.
I'm not saying we've won Florida at this point, Larry. I'm saying that we're outperforming our vote goals in a number of critical counties, and we're optimistic about it at this point in the night.
What do you make of this whole night, and how's the candidate holding up?
He's holding up great. He's obviously with his family and watching the tallies, and very much looking forward to having come to a successful conclusion. We're optimistic.
We will have no mandate this evening, and we obviously have a split nation. What do you make of this?
Well, look, this is was always going to be a close contest. It's the office of the presidency was an open seat. It doesn't happen that often in American politics. We have two new two baby boom generation leaders as the heads of their parties, and the issues people are, there were no economic crisis. We're at peace, and so the electorate was actually in a fairly content mindset, and so this race was always going to come down close. But I think that the governor's agenda that he laid out of saving Social Security, improving public education, modernizing Medicare, restoring our military readiness, and providing some tax relief to America's families, he'll have a mandate if we end up with 270 electoral college votes tonight.
But it can't be a mandate if one person has 50.2% of the vote and one has 49.8%.
Well, I think that we'll see how the Congress shapes up and how they view it.
Ed, anything tonight surprise you?
Well, there have been surprises throughout the night, but
did any state surprise you?
Did any state surprise us? No, we were and are still in play in a lot of states that have been traditionally Democratic. I see that Arkansas just came in recently, Tennessee, West Virginia. These have been traditionally Democratic-leaning states, and so we were hopeful about being able to carry those states, but we certainly weren't taking anything for granted there.
Thank you very much, Ed.
Thank you.
Ed Gillespie, spokesman for the Bush campaign, two very confident spokespersons, and both saying they're going to win Florida. And we'll return it now. We'll be back with our panel in a little while. Let's go back to Atlanta and Judy.
All right, Larry, what a night, what an election, what a count. We're going to look at 2 of the 4 states that we are still not able to call and look very closely at the raw vote. Right now, the state of Wisconsin, the Badger State, Al Gore has 48%. Again, this is 64% of the precincts reporting Al Gore with 48%, George W. Bush with 47%. You can see why this election is so close. In the state, and continuing in the state of Wisconsin, we're going to look at the Nader vote. Ralph Nader is pulling 4%, while there is less than a 1 percentage point difference between George Bush and Al Gore.
Ralph Nader has 64,000 votes. That would probably give the state to him. Now let's go to Oregon.
Oregon, again, 49%, half the precincts reporting less than 1%, about 1% of the votes separating Al Gore and George Bush. But now let's look at the Nader vote and the Buchanan vote and the vote for John Hagelin, who is the Natural Law Party nominee in Oregon. We will check on those numbers. We're not able to bring them to you right now. We have to pull up an entirely separate graphic there, if you will. Our apologies. We'll try to do that when we come back. We're going to take a break and look even deeper into these numbers. We'll be back.
The decision has already been made. The votes have been cast. They just have to be tabulated.
Tom, it's 12:25 in the morning.
What's my investment strategy? How about buy things before they go up?
For a personal financial plan, please press 5.
I'm gonna pay for this.
What was I?
This market's still got a lot of upside.
This market's going south.
Why didn't they write this last month?
Can't believe Dad thought he could check stock prices on this thing.
Okay, 2 of your stocks are up. What about the other 15?
Thank you, Painweber.
Looking to save more and spend less this holiday season? With the Chrysler Holiday Sale, you can do just that. Because now you can save over $2,300 when you buy a new 2001 Town & Country with 4.9% financing. Or choose a $299 lease on the award-winning 2001 Chrysler Voyager. So take advantage of the Chrysler Holiday Sale today for savings that let you spend more on a real holiday priority, yourself.
Tomorrow on a special edition of CNN Newsstand, Jeff Greenfield wraps up Election 2000 with a unique look at who won the undecided vote. 10 Eastern on CNN.
Voice to the beautiful songs of Christmas on her new album, Dream a Dream. Enjoy 19 holiday songs from the one and only Charlotte Church. Charlotte Church's Dream a Dream. Make this Christmas and every Christmas more joyous with Charlotte Church. Call now.
Press and Novak talk about the new administration on Crossfire tomorrow.
It is a close election, and we're down to 4 states. We don't know the results of the outcome in those states. Let's look at what the states are. In Oregon, with 49%, almost half the precincts reporting, there is a 2 percentage point separation. 48% for George Bush, W. Bush, 46% for Al Gore. And now let's look at what Ralph Nader is drawing. 4%. 32,000 votes.
Way more than the margin.
Way more than the margin, if you assume that most of the Nader votes would come from Al Gore, which is an assumption that some people will make. Others may disagree.
Yes.
In the state of Iowa at this hour, with 84% of the precincts reporting, Al Gore is ahead by 1 percentage point, 562,000 votes to 551,000 for George W. Bush. And look, Ralph Nader, 2%.
In other words, if you assume most of those votes come from Gore, as our exit polls are showing, Gore's only up by 11,000. You could probably add another 6,000 to 10,000 votes to his lead safely.
Right. That's right.
And in the state of Florida, the one we've been looking at all night long, look at this, 86% of the precincts reporting. At this moment, George Bush, 50% to Al Gore's 48,000, 2.4 million to 2.3 million. And now let's look at the other names on the ballot. Ralph Nader, 2%, drawing 78,000 votes.
Gore is losing by 103,000 votes. Nader's drawing 78,000. You figure without Nader, it would be even closer than it is now.
But the only state where we can calculate that Nader is clearly tilting the state marginally to George W. Bush is Oregon.
Pat Neal is in Washington at Nader's campaign location. Pat?
Well, as you were talking about, Oregon is the key here. In Oregon, it appears now that Nader has about 4% of the vote, according to some of these exit polls. Now, Nader is particularly strong. He's just come to the podium here talking about the strength of this growing Green Party, to talk about how people needed to sit up and take notice of this Green Party. Now, people in Oregon understand this. He is particularly strong in the areas of Portland, Eugene, Salem, the Willamette Valley, all the way down to Ashland near the California border. There are issues out there that have gone on for some time that Nader has been involved in, environmental issues, the idea of breaching those dams to save the salmon. Also the fact that one thing we need to point out, that Nader polled 4% in 1996 in Oregon without ever campaigning there. So that is a key factor there. Also, we've looked at Washington State, what he's done there. Also, Florida, as you mentioned, 2% of the vote in Florida. Now, Nader was just in Florida on Saturday night, rallying the people, getting them excited, and getting people to go out and vote for him. He has been here, he's come back in, as we mentioned now, and telling people that, as we said, that this Green Party is something to be reckoned with. Bernie?
Okay, Pat Neal, I'm wondering, has Ralph Nader privately or any of his people in the campaign had anything to say other than what Nader has claimed, that he's not being a spoiler, he's not raining on Al Gore's parade, he won't cost him the election?
Well, he has said all along throughout this campaign, and they are saying privately as well as publicly, that Al Gore, if Al Gore loses this campaign, it was because of Al Gore. It was not because of Ralph Nader. He has said this repeatedly. He has said this defiantly down to today, that he is pulling votes because of his popularity, and it does not have anything to do with Al Gore. Actually, the Nader people have said that they expect and they predict 40% of the vote for Nader would have been people who never would have gone to the polls at all. Bernie?
Okay, thank you, Pat Neal, at Ralph Nader's headquarters in Washington. Judy?
All right, Ralph Nader, I'm looking at a quote from him when he singled out the Democratic Party, the campaigning he's done throughout this year. He called it a hollow party that tells labor unions, minority groups, and its progressive members, you've got nowhere to go because we're not as bad as the Republican Party. All right, we're going to go back to Washington now to our own Larry King. Larry.
Thank you, Judy, and let's get back to our outstanding panel. They are the Honorable Ann Richards, the former Democratic governor of Texas. She's been with us all night, as has Howard Baker, the former Senate Majority Leader and former Chief of Staff in the Reagan administration. And Bob Woodward, the Pulitzer Prize-winning Assistant Managing Editor of the Washington Post. Okay, we're down to 4. We had the misread on Florida. What do you make of it, Ann? Well, he has to win Florida, right?
Yeah,
You're a guy.
Yeah, he's got to win Florida, and he ought to win Oregon. And if he does, we win. If he doesn't, we lose.
Is Nader costing him it tonight?
I think Nader is cutting into him, but I don't think he's going to cost him the vote.
Senator?
I don't think so either. I think that, to begin with, it's a remarkable election. I have never seen anything like it, and frankly, I did not think it would be this close. But in the final analysis, it does come down to Florida and perhaps one other state, and that's just the way it is. And on Florida, with so many absentee ballots to be counted, I would bet, Larry, that it's tomorrow before we have a read on who's, it's already tomorrow.
25 minutes, it'll be tomorrow.
Unless the governor were to win the other 3 states.
Exactly.
And therefore win it without Florida.
But Florida really is key, and it's going to be tomorrow in all likelihood before we know the result of that. Now, there are all sorts of combinations where one or the other could win, but without Florida, it becomes extremely unlikely.
How big a fuss, Bob, will this misread make? Tomorrow.
You mean the initial miscall on Florida?
This would be a whole different picture right now.
You can't tell, but I mean the difficulty right now is yet another misread. Clearly, there are very few votes that are the difference between victory and defeat here. Absentee ballots floating around. The Bush campaign spokesman was making a good case. It seemed that maybe New Mexico was still in play. So somebody is likely to come out with the Dewey beats Truman headline and have to take that back.
But I don't think the question is going to be the missed call. I think the question is going to be if there were irregularities. When you've got a vote that is this close, and you have as much money and time and effort invested, there are going to be some deep discussions about what took place in Florida.
Missouri might change with St. Louis voting late.
It certainly might. Let me lovingly disagree with Ann about that. I don't think we've seen any signs of irregularity, and even if there were, I'm reminded of that judgment that Richard Nixon made when he chose not to contest the election. And you know, there were patent irregularities in the Illinois result at that time. I really do think that regardless of who wins, Gore or Bush, that the nation will unite behind them. I think they will have a mandate with United Nations the day after the election.
And the loser will
And I
acquiesce.
think the loser certainly ought to and almost certainly will coalesce behind the new leader.
Is this a case, Bob, where the media, the mainstream, as some critics call it media, was correct? They said we'd be up late. A lot of the others said, nah, it'd be over by 7:38. We'd be up late. We wouldn't know. Closest election ever.
Well, it turned out
right.
much more so, and I mean, it seems to be narrowing in a very bizarre way.
With a close popular vote.
I mean, what Howard Baker says is correct, but also it would really be nice when the election is over and everything is counted that there is clarity. It will be so much nicer if one candidate emerges and there is not this kind of ambiguity that lingers for decades as it did in the Nixon-Kennedy race of 1960.
It's not going to happen, though, is it, Ann?
The other thing to remember, though, Larry, is that there's some other elections taking place. The Senate is very, very close. The House is very, very close. I mean, regardless of what happens later on. Both of those bodies are going to be so tightly between the two parties, and this election being this close, believe me, government ain't going to act a whole lot.
The key then for the country is, what do we do, Howard? Let's take this as a fact. Half this country is in one corner and half is in another. How do they govern?
Well, they do govern because the country's built that way. And
Compromise.
Well, perhaps, but I think whichever man is elected president will have a period when there is cooperation with the Congress, and he'll have his opportunity. Some call it the first 100 days, but anyway, he'll have a period when he'll have his own mandate, and he'll be able to do a lot. And the country will demand that. I think if Congress and the president, whoever that president is, decides to go to war instantly, that the country would come down on them like a ton of brick. I just don't think it'll work that way.
What do you think?
Well, I think the interesting question is, what is the message that the public and the voters are trying to send? And the message is, to a certain extent, we don't want too much governing. We don't want anyone to have a mandate. There is enough uncertainty. Well, we want the military. We want the checks to go out and the military to function, but the programs that were presented by Bush and Gore, no one swallowed them whole. No one has a mandate, and maybe that's the essence of what's being said here. Let's be careful with new programs and new spending, and it's the old Howard Baker theme, less government.
Careful doesn't forge great leadership, though, does it?
Well, it doesn't.
It's careful leadership.
Yeah, it doesn't allow you to step out and become a great leader. It does allow you, though, to be selective in the issues that you're going to push, and I think that that's what's going to happen whichever one of these men becomes the president. They're going to refine these issues down to 1 or 2 or maybe 3, because it will be very difficult in a divided Senate and a divided House, as close as it is, to be able to go with any large, expansive program.
In a sense, then, Senator, the public is sending these two men a message.
Yeah, it is. The public sent a very clear message, and the message, in my view, was not much difference in what you're saying. Maybe technical differences in programs, but you're essentially saying the same thing. Not much difference in what you're proposing. There are significant differences, but that wasn't the determining factor. They chose this election on the basis, really, in my view, of who they instinctively thought would make a better president. And you know, Larry, that's as good a way to judge a presidential candidate as any. It's really better than issue papers. Do you trust this man? Do you want him to lead this country?
Woulda, shoulda, coulda. What are they going to say about Clinton?
Don't know.
What are they going to say about Hillary? We haven't discussed her. She's the only one tonight on any network where they carried her complete acceptance speech everywhere.
And at least the part I saw, she did not mention her husband, who was dutifully standing behind her, clapping.
What do you make of that story?
Well, it is a big victory for her. There were lots of doubters. She went and did it by the book. She really worked hard. She mastered New York. In that statement tonight, she kept, you know, it's not as if she's forgotten New York. She kept talking about New York, New Yorkers, naming county leaders and so forth. So she learned how to win, and she's done it. And the hat should go off to her.
If we have an important call, we understand. Thanks to Ann Richards, Howard Baker, and Bob Woodward. We may be coming back, we may not, but we have an important call. Let's go to Judy.
All right, Larry, this is not a call in the presidential race. It is a very important call, and that is CNN is saying that the United States House of Representatives will remain in Republican hands. The Republicans will retain control of the House. Let's go right to Wolf Blitzer over at the Balance of Power arena. Wolf.
Judy, the Democrats needed to gain at least 7 seats, net seats in the House of Representatives in order to become the majority, in order to allow Dick Gephardt, the congressman from Missouri, to be the next Speaker of the House of Representatives. That has not happened. Stuart Rothenberg, tell us what's going on in the House of Representatives, why the Republicans are expected now to retain the majority.
Well, Wolf, overall, we have not that many seats that changed hands one way or the other, and the Republicans did surprisingly well in the East, enough to offset any late Democratic advantage in the West. So, for example, the Republicans picked up a seat in New York in the 1st Congressional District, in Western Pennsylvania in the 4th. It looks like a surprise win in Eastern Connecticut in the 2nd Congressional District, where Sam Gabenson may well go down. It looks like he has gone down. In New Jersey, it looks like Dick Zimmer has won that seat over Rush Holt. Zimmer, a former congressman, has come back to retake it from Holt in a close race. Congresswoman Pat Danner, a Democrat, retired in Missouri. Her son was unable to hold a seat for the Democrats. It looks like Republican Sam Graves has won it. And on the other hand, the Democrats just didn't pick up enough Republican seats. They picked up a district, Rick Lazio's district on Long Island, Suffolk County, the 2nd Congressional District, where the Republicans nominated an African-American woman. She lost. That's a Democratic pickup. And in Oklahoma's 2nd Congressional District, which we mentioned a while ago, at least it seems like days ago, doesn't it, Wolf? Other than that, a seat in New Mexico possibly, and some in California in the West, but just not enough takeaways by the Democrats.
And as a result of all of this, Dennis Hastert of Illinois will remain the Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Well, that's for the Republican conference to decide, but absolutely, yes, the Republicans are going to keep control of the House of Representatives. They might have an additional seat or 2. They might be down 2 or 3. We can't know quite yet. We're waiting for the West Coast to come in, but they're going to hold.
We've been waiting for an important race in the U.S. Senate. CNN can now call a winner in Washington State. Maria Cantwell, a major executive of the high-tech industry, defeating the Republican incumbent Senator Slade Gorton. This is not a huge surprise, but it does represent a net gain, of course, for the Democrats.
Absolutely, and it's actually the 2nd time Slade Gorton has been defeated as an incumbent in a bid for re-election. Happened a number of years ago as well. The Democrats always thought they had a good chance here, but it was interesting. Both parties had very different polling. The Republicans were pretty sure that Slade Gorton was ahead and would win. The Democrats thought the same about Maria Cantwell. I guess the Democratic polling was better, and they were right.
So right now, as of now, the balance of power in the Senate, 49 Republicans, 47 Democrats, 4 seats in the U.S. Senate still up for grabs. Those seats are from Missouri, Michigan, Nebraska, and Montana. How do those states look right now, Stuart?
Well, again, if the Democrats have to get a sweep here, Montana is a particularly difficult race for them because it is a generally conservative and Republican state. That's a tough nut to crack, but right now in Michigan and Missouri, it's hard to tell. The Republicans could go 3 for 3, or the Democrats could go 3 for 3.
And that Missouri seat is especially interesting, almost unprecedented.
It's quite tight. It's a close race. Yeah, nobody knows exactly what to make of it, given the unusual circumstances. Ashcroft has been holding a narrow lead throughout the evening, but it's awfully close.
All right, let's take a look at the Senate balance of power, where it stands right now. There were, going into tonight, 35 Republican holdovers, 31 Democratic holdovers. So far, 1 tonight, 14 Republicans have been elected, 16 Democrats have been elected. As a result, the new total is this: 49 Republicans, 47 Democrats, 4 undecided seats. Those 4 undecided seats, once again, Missouri, John Ashcroft, the incumbent, against the late Mel Carnahan, the governor. In Michigan, Spencer Abraham against Debbie Stabenow. In Montana, Conrad Burns and Brian Schweitzer, still up in the air. And in Nebraska, Ben Nelson and Don Stenberg. That race in Nebraska has been an exciting race. Normally, Republicans seem to be the power in Nebraska, but the Democrat in this particular case, Ben Nelson, he's still in the running.
Absolutely, but I think the reason Stenberg is doing so well is it's the republicanism of the state in a presidential year. Republican insiders in Washington have actually been rather pessimistic about that race. Nelson, a former governor, was popular, lost to Chuck Hagel, you may remember a few years ago, has come back now. He's no longer a governor. He can run as a moderate Democrat. It's a difficult race for the Republicans, but I think there are a lot of Stenberg people that are shaking their finger at me and say, aha, we told you so. We told you this was going to be a close race, but I don't know whether he can win.
And let's take another close look at Montana. It's normally a Republican state. Conrad Burns, the incumbent Republican senator, facing a stiff challenge from Brian Schweitzer, a rancher. That race still too close to call.
Right, and Schweitzer, of course, used the issue of prescription drugs to his advantage early on to get a lot of earned media coverage, what we call free media, redefine this race. Burns was rather slow to respond, and I think Republicans are nervous about the seat. In the last few days, Republicans thought that their polling showed Conrad Burns with a slight uptick and were somewhat more hopeful.
All right, and we have a new race to call now in Vermont. We've been waiting a long time. CNN can now call Governor Howard Dean, the incumbent, the winner, beating Ruth Dwyer in what was a very, very close race. Howard Dean had signed into law in Vermont what's called the same-sex marriage provision, yet he went on to be reelected.
Well, this was a three-way race, and the real question was whether Howard Dean was going to get the 50% of the vote that he needed, according to state law, to be reelected, or whether the race would be thrown to the state legislature. As you mentioned, this civil unions issue was quite controversial. The governor had been popular outside of that issue and apparently was able to hang on.
So there's basically, as we're looking at the Senate, the House, the governor's races, no huge surprises, but there's still some doubt as far as the U.S. Senate is concerned. The House of Representatives will remain in a Republican majority. The Senate still up for grabs.
The one thing we can say, Wolf, there has not been a major sea change in American politics in the House or the Senate.
All right, Stuart Rothenberg, thank you. Now back to the desk.
All right, Wolf Blitzer, the one other observation I would make about the Senate is that as of now, there will be 2 more women in the United States Senate. Right now, there are 9 women serving with the addition of Hillary Rodham Clinton from the state of New York, Maria Cantwell all the way across the country in the state of Washington. There will be 11, and potentially, if we don't know how Michigan's going to turn out, but we still have Debbie Stabenow running against the incumbent Spence Abraham.
And my observation would be to remind everyone what Trent Lott, the Senate Majority Leader, said here in an interview on CNN a short while ago. He really doubts that the Democrats are going to go 5 up tonight in the Senate.
One other thing. If the Democrats pick up 3 of these 4 seats that are out, it becomes 50-50, and if Joe Lieberman and Al Gore do win the White House, Joe Lieberman's decision to run for the Senate and not cede the seat to a Democrat who would almost certainly have won will cost the Democrats control of the United States Senate. I cannot remember any election where so many things turned on one thin dime.
Is there any question if Joe Lieberman had given up that seat that the Democrats would have retained?
Attorney General Blumenthal they actually did some polling on this, would have been an easy victor over anyone the Republicans had put out. And I think, you know, if Joe Lieberman becomes vice president, becomes president of the Senate, the first thing he'll face is a fairly angry minority of Democrats who said, thanks a whole lot for costing us control of the Senate.
Yeah, and what Stu just said, if the Congress does remain in Republican hands, the House is in Republican hands, the Senate, odds are slightly in that favor, then that's really a vote for the status quo. Democrats thought they had a chance to break through. He said there was no sea change in that. It'll be interesting, however, if you have a Republican president, if George Bush wins, and a Republican Congress, this would be the first time the Republicans control everything since 1954. And I think a lot of Republicans would be overcome with excitement, irrational exuberance, and they might overinterpret their mandate if that's the outcome tonight.
Would it be so irrational?
I think it would be, given the closeness. I think the vote for Republican Congress is probably a vote for the status quo, and the vote for George Bush, if he wins, would not exactly be a sweeping mandate.
Well, just to point out, when the Republicans took the Congress in 1994, and some would argue they overreached and perhaps thought they had more of a mandate than they did, they handed a big club to Bill Clinton, and I think we even heard in what Speaker Hastert and Majority Leader Trent Lott have said is a cautionary tale to the more ideological Republicans to say, look, you know, this is obviously going to be a very close, evenly divided government. Whatever happens, let's take it easy.
And the guy who would have the job of doing that would be, if he's elected, President Bush, who would then be able to say, he'd have to say, I control the agenda, and I was not elected to create a conservative revolution in the country, because he wasn't.
And in fact, that's exactly what Karl Rove said to me. I had a conversation with him earlier today about this very thing, and that's one of the things he said. He said, if we have a Republican House and a Republican Senate, he said, we by no means assume that, you know, we can get what we want. We're going to have to work with both
And quickly,
parties.
if Al Gore wins and the Republican Congress is reelected, that really does look like a vote for the status quo in very good times.
All right.
And you have to consider the influence of Christian conservatives tonight in this vote.
All right, we are...
And what they did.
Yeah, well, they mobilized a lot of voters for Governor Bush in some key states, like maybe Iowa.
We've been able to call the House of Representatives. Will be remaining in Republican hands. We're still waiting on the Senate, and we are waiting for the White House. We don't know yet. It's 246 to 242. Much more when we come back.
Coverage of Election 2000 is brought to you by Chrysler and Payne-Weber. For expanded coverage, log on to CNN.com. Chrysler, we're reinventing the passion for driving. And Payne-Weber, thank you, Payne-Weber.
Looking to save more and spend less this holiday season? With the Chrysler Holiday Sale, you can do just that. Because now you can save over $5,100 when you buy a new 2000 Concorde LX with 0% financing. Or choose a low $259 lease on the award-winning 2001 Sebring LX sedan. So take advantage of the Chrysler Holiday Sale today for savings that let you spend more on a real holiday priority, yourself.
What's my investment strategy? How about buy things before they go up?
For a personal financial plan, please press 5.
I'm going to pay for this.
What was I?
This market's still got a lot of upside. This market's going south.
Why didn't they write this last month?
Can't believe Dad thought he could check stock prices on this thing.
Okay, 2 of your stocks are up. What about the other 15?
Thank you, Payne-Weber.
Got yourself into too much credit card debt? Why not point and click your way out of debt with a second mortgage from Ditech.com? Whether you have equity or no equity, good credit or not so good credit, Ditech has a second mortgage with absolutely no closing costs to help you lower your monthly payments now. So point and click your way out of high-interest, non-tax deductible credit card debt at Ditech.com or call us at 1-800-71-FIX.
The internet goes everywhere because of us.
The internet is more reliable because of us.
The internet is growing because of us.
The internet is more exciting because of us. The internet is faster because of us.
The internet is better because of us.
Delivering the most content from the world's biggest network, Akamai.
3 great names. 3 great legacies. Now, one great company with the power and vision to forge a new legacy, building the global community with innovative solutions for industry, transportation, power, and the environment. One great company. Washington Group International, the dynamic new force in the engineering and construction industry.
The political ground war for control of the White House is still underway at this hour between Vice President Al Gore and George Bush. Look how close it is in the race for the White House. The Texas governor with 246 electoral votes. The vice president, 242. These are the states still out. We cannot call these states. Florida has 25 electoral votes, Iowa 7, Oregon 7, and Wisconsin 11.
Now, notice there that Bush needs 24 electoral votes. If Florida were to go in the Bush column, that would put him over the top. Gore needs 28. If Florida were to go to the Gore column, he would still need 3 more electoral votes from one of those remaining states.
In other words, Bush could also put this together without Florida. Bush could win Iowa, Oregon, and Wisconsin, and no matter what happens to the state of Florida, Bush would be the next president.
And speaking of Florida, we heard a lot about absentee ballots, and Mark Fabiani of the Gore campaign was saying, well, you know, those are seniors and that's our strength. As you pointed out earlier, it bears repeating, according to the exit polls, Bush is actually leading Gore among Florida seniors for all the talk about prescription drugs and Social Security. And where Gore is running big in Florida is among 18 to 29-year-olds, where our exit poll says he is running 56 to 38 ahead. So just to scramble this further, the notion that seniors in Florida are all kind of retired Democrats from the North ready to vote for Al Gore, according to the exit polls so far, that's not what is going on.
Well, what sort of margin do we know does Bush have among seniors in Florida? Bill, do we have that kind of information?
Yeah, Jeff has it right there.
I don't mean to step on Bill's toes, but I got the piece of paper.
You have the latest data.
Okay.
This is how Stalin beat Trotsky. He had the paper. 52-46 among, I'm sorry, Bush is leading Gore 52-46 among seniors 65 and over. He is ahead 50-48 among seniors 60 and over. And as I said, Gore running very strongly in the youth vote in Florida.
And we showed in Arizona that seniors helped Bush carry that state. There was a very heavy vote for Bush among seniors in Arizona. So the idea that Gore is just sweeping up seniors with his Social Security and Medicare, that Gore is sweeping them up because of fears about Social Security and Medicare, it's just not so.
Which means that a number of them are perfectly willing to entertain the idea of having that Social Security money invested. For not so much for them, but for the generations to come.
Or they might be voting for Bush for other reasons, like conservative views on values and a desire for moral leadership, and putting aside their reservations about his Social Security and Medicare plans.
Could this be the Clinton factor?
Well,
yes.
Let's hold off on the Clinton factor for just a second and say that CNN is making a call in West Virginia. The challenger, Bob Wise, has unseated Governor Cecil Underwood. That's in West Virginia. Jeff, the Clinton factor you were saying?
Well, I'm asking Bill, if seniors are not voting on prescription drugs and Social Security as much as the Gore campaign would have liked, could it be that for seniors, the personal misbehavior of President Clinton is more of a factor than in, say, other age groups?
Well, that's exactly what we found in 1998. Remember, when Republicans held on to Congress, most of the reason why they held on to Congress was because of older women, senior women, who appear to have been dismayed by Clinton's behavior in the Monica Lewinsky affair, the fact that they disapproved of his values, and that drew a lot of them to vote Republican for Congress and save the Republican Congress. In this case, they may be voting for George Bush, that's senior women, for the same reason.
Well, the House is apparently going to remain in the hands of the Republican Party, and the Senate, well, we'll have to wait and see what happens. One guest that Larry King has is especially interested in the Senate. Back to you, Larry, and your panel.
Thanks, and we're going to wrap it up with this outstanding panel. You're right, Bernie. You're interested in the Senate, 49-47 as of right now. What is this saying?
Well, it's saying that the country's equally divided on the presidential contest and in the Congress. It also probably means that Republicans will keep the Senate, but by a narrow margin. It means Trent Lott will remain as majority leader, but his authority will be tightly circumscribed.
Is this tenuous, Ann Richards?
I think it is difficult to govern when things are this even. The question is whether there are going to be broad strokes. You know, are you really going to privatize Social Security with this kind of a margin? I think they're going to look at the exit polls on issues. How did the country feel about vouchers, for example? I think that'll guide, because when things are close, people are going to start paying real attention to what the public thinks.
Well, help me here. Is this change or not change?
I don't know. I was thinking of the poor people who have to write the newspaper headlines tonight. It truly is a nightmare situation, because to a certain extent, you have to tell the readers, look at tomorrow's paper, not the one we're giving you.
Papers.
Yeah, Thursday's paper, simply because how do you write a headline that says, unclear, stay tuned, unsure?
So what do we do with this? There's nothing we can do but observe it.
We could stay until 1 a.m. tomorrow, and maybe there would be a more complete answer.
You have been noble all evening. What has surprised you the most tonight, Ann?
Oh, I don't know. I guess that it really did turn out to be as close as it was. I thought that one of these guys was going to just break out, you know, and take it sometime at the last minute. but it didn't happen. It really was as divided as all of us who were out there campaigning saw it.
And you mentioned, Senator Baker, at one time tonight how happier you and Ann are than these people.
I tell you what, the highest estate in politics is to have served and retired. It is perfectly marvelous to be out here looking in instead of being out there and running and hanging by your fingernails to see how it turns out.
Why do they want this?
Oh, it's not a compulsion. It really is an answer to a call for public service. And I don't mean that to sound noble, but that is the motivation, Democrats and Republicans. And they go through an awful lot in order to do it.
It's just like, it's almost like being a missionary or something. You know, you just, whatever the time is, you feel called to do it. And you love it while you're doing it, but you don't know how...
rejection Woodward and I don't face. You face it Tuesday in November.
Yeah, but it isn't really a rejection.
You face
when you lose...
a sudden decision on Election Day. But let me tell you, and this, I guess, will be my parting comment. I have 4 grandsons, and each one of them, I will tell that politics and public service is the highest secular undertaking that they can engage in.
Well, I might say to all of you, it has been quite a night. It is still quite a night. It is going to be quite a morning. And we may be seeing you all tomorrow night. Thank you. Thanks all of you very
Good
much.
night,
Thanks
Larry.
to all our guests. Governor Ann Richards, Senator Howard Baker, and Pulitzer Prize winning Bob Woodward. New book is Maestro. Coming out. He's going to be with us next week to talk about that. Right now, we're going back to the national desk. Florida, Oregon, Iowa, Wisconsin. Guys, what's going on?
You said it, Larry. Those are the 4. Your guests have been terrific. You've been terrific. Thanks very much to all of you. We are going to take a break. It's coming up. In fact, it is 1 o'clock on the East Coast, 10 o'clock at night on the West Coast. We're going to be here till we know who the next president is. We'll be right back.
Tomorrow on a special edition of CNN Newsstand, Jeff Greenfield wraps up Election 2000 with a unique look at who won the undecided vote. 10 Eastern on CNN.
For the first time ever.
It's been a hard day's night. Help! I need somebody. Help! Not just anybody. Help! You know I need someone.
The Beatles won 79 minutes and 12 seconds that brought the world together.
Penny Lane is in my ears and in my eyes.
Special packaging includes the famous Richard Avedon photos of the Beatles and a 32-page full-color annotated booklet.
Hey Jude, don't make it bad.